Good afternoon and welcome to another day of NATSO Live. My name is Amy Toner and I'm NATSO's Vice President Publishing and Digital Content, and it's my pleasure to bring you this education with Miss Pamela. Speaking of Pamela, before I do our notes and introduce our speaker, she's going to thank our sponsors. All you, Pamela.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you. I'm very pleased and proud to present to you the 4 sponsors that made this week possible. We have 2 title sponsors, CatScale and Federated Insurance. CatScale has more than 2,000 locations across the US and Canada, and there are no startup costs, and equipment maintenance and training are provided. So if you would like to learn more about them, you can go to catscale.com, and I'm sure they will be happy to answer any questions. If you need help getting in touch with them, just let us know. Federated Insurance has been a NATSO Chairman Circle member for over 10 years. Federated's insurance agent knows about the Travel Plaza business, and they have knowledge to provide the correct and specific coverage that you need. So also more details can be found at federatedinsurance.com. We have 2 education speakers, McLean and DAS. Both are also Chairman Circle members, so thank you for supporting our industry at the highest level. McLean is a supply chain services leader, providing grocery and food service supply chain solutions for travel centers and other businesses. McLean optimizes the purchase, the flow, and sale of products from thousands of suppliers to more than 54,000 retail locations. And as you can also see, DAS has sponsored our background all week. And DAS Company is a full service marketing and supply chain portfolio company. They are privately held. They design, import, and distribute truck and auto supply, travel gear, mobile electronics that offer safety, convenience, comfort, and connectedness to your on-the-go customer. So thank you to these 4 sponsors. Without them, we would not have been able to bring you this great content. So back to you, Amy.
Pamela, do you want to tell people about the one-on-one appointments?
I would love to do that. Yes. So in August, we will be helping all vendor companies choose 3 organizations that they would like to have 20-minute meetings with. So all of you vendor companies that are on the phone today, please let us know your list of 10, and then we're going to help you with 3 20-minute conversations via Zoom. Travel Plaza members who are on the phone will be getting in touch with you, giving you some choices to make, and hopefully you will find those conversations just as valuable and informational as the vendor companies will find meeting you as important to them. So we'll be in touch in the next few weeks to get those arranged. It's something that we are starting new. We do one-on-one introductions throughout the year, but never specifically in a week or 2-week timeframe like we're trying to accomplish in August. So more to come soon.
Thanks, Pamela. All right, before we do the live presentation, I just have a few notes. We're going to take questions at the end if we have time. Drop them into the chat at any time. There's a lot of great slides and a lot of very detailed slides in here. So if you have questions as we're doing it, please drop them in the chat and I'll be sure to read them at the end. I think that's it. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Mr. Donald Broughton. All righty. Mr. Broughton is Principal Managing Partner of Broughton Capital, LLC. He founded it in 2017 after nearly 2 decades as one of Wall Street's top analysts. He has long been known in the transportation industry for his quarterly tracking of trucking bankruptcies. Prior to working on Wall Street, he spent almost a decade in the beverage industry, serving as the corporate manager of distribution for Dr. Pepper 7-Up and as CEO for Bevmark Concepts. All right, let's do it. Roll the presentation.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Amy's partially right. While I did, when I left the Dr. Pepper 7-Up companies, I was their corporate DM. I started there sitting in a cube, auditing freight bills, going to grad school at night, and trying to figure out the freight business. I will tell you a couple of things that you need to know about me. One, one of the luckiest people on the planet. God has blessed me so many ways. and I'll explain why. Two, I have a differentiated view. So forget everything you know, let go of your preconceived notions, and let me challenge. Let me give you a couple of different ways of looking at things that I think will be prove to be helpful in navigating your way through the coming weeks, months, and even years. Things you can rely on, and things that you can readily check back on a regular basis. I at times have been very, very bearish about the economy. When I left AG Edwards, I was literally I was on their investment strategy committee, and I was literally the most bearish person on their committee, starting in late 06 throughout 07 and into 08, and was right to be so. But it wasn't somehow that I was omniscient or really that smart or clever. It's just what I saw in freight flow. That said, while at times I can be very bearish, I have never been more bullish about the economy than I am right now. And I want to tell you why. I got a ton to talk about, more slides than I really should have for an hour of talk. But so I'm going to blast through it, but there's just so much to talk about. And I'm really just that excited about what we're on the verge of. So get ready. Put your cell phones down and pay attention, because I got a lot to talk about. Fasten your seatbelts. This is going to be a fast and wild ride. I started this part of my career 25 years ago with one simple thesis. Oh, by the way, that's me when I had hair, or at least I could grow hair on the top of my head instead of out of my ears and on my face. You might notice also that CNN doesn't even exist anymore, and the stocks are traded in fractions, not decimals as they are now. But along the way, I have done one thing and one thing alone, and that's basically again and again and again repeat what people in transportation already knew. I looked at freight flows and I translated it into predictions on earnings for companies and predictions on what was going to happen in the economy. And again and again and again, the guy sitting there auditing freight bills, the guy sitting there routing freight, guy or gal, the person driving the truck knows as much or more about what's happening at the 5 foot, 6 foot level of the economy than anybody else, especially us ivory tower folks on Wall Street. Well, you heard what I said. I just feel lucky every morning, and even though I'm not necessarily technically competent on occasion, like I said, I've done one thing and one thing alone, and that was basically tell people what I saw happening in freight flow. And what's very interesting is again and again, they're very interested in what's happening in freight flow. But not only is Wall Street interested in what's happening in freight flow, and not only does it provide a very differentiated view, really ahead of the curve view, but what's also been very, very interesting to me is that when I go and I meet with people out in the industry, the air freight guys want to know what the railroad guys are doing. The railroad guys want to know what the truckers are doing. The truckers want to know what's going on with the others. And again, it's given us a lead. It's like that story that people tell of the two guys running away from the grizzly bear, and one of them stops to tie his shoes, and he says, "Why are you doing that? You're not going to be able to outrun the bear." And he says, "I don't need to outrun the bear. I just need to outrun you." And I don't know that it puts us that far, but it puts us far enough ahead. We don't get eaten by the bear. We get ahead of the other guy who didn't tie his shoes. Most recently, when we looked into air freight in the January timeframe, we published a report in February on the January air freight volumes, and we came right out and said it. The coronavirus is already driving negative economic consequences more dire than SARS, and could produce short-term economic calamity rivaling the 08-09 recession. Why? Because that's what the freight flow said. And when you dug down into it, you could see it was getting bad, and it was getting bad quickly. And indeed, that turned out to be the case. When that report was published, the Dow was 29,000, about to take a 6,000 point collapse. But 90 days later, we could see freight flows actually hit a bottom and start to improve a little, not a lot, but they found a bottom and started to improve. And so we turned and started to become a little bullish, not as bullish as we are now, but again, just following what the freight flow tells us. So let me show you what we look at and how we do it. The first thing I would tell you is it's important, especially in today's age, to think about your world this way. Technology magnifies and it distorts the message. Understand that the message of media has always been be afraid, be afraid, be afraid. That's how they get you to tune back in. But we're not living in a world where Walter Cronkite tells you to be afraid at 6 o'clock every night. We're living in a world in which you're told to be afraid nonstop by your phone. You can't go anywhere without a screen, a television, a radio, something. You're bombarded with the media's message of be afraid. So look at it, listen to the facts, but ignore the emotion behind it. Do not be afraid. The other thing I would do to tell you that's important, I'm not going to go into depth on it here because we just don't have time, but I would encourage you, really strongly encourage you, go to Wikipedia and look up cognitive biases. Spend an hour, maybe more, but at least an hour learning what cognitive biases are in case you don't understand them already. They're the basic, what I would call troubleshooting chapter of how to run a human brain. And if you don't understand how they work, then you get fooled by things all the time. It is the simplest way there is to know what is fake news and what is not. When I read something and or hear something and I know that they've incorporated a cognitive bias, because I understand how they work and I understand how they prey on me and others, I know one of two things is true. Either A, the person pushing that message knows exactly what they're doing and they're trying to exploit me, and therefore I should not listen to them. They're not credible. Or two, they're not disciplined in their thinking, and therefore I shouldn't listen to them. And either way, they get nixed from the list, and I will never read or listen to that writer, reporter, source again. It'll be helpful. I trust me, because what's happening is technology in the world we're in, more and more and more data is available. And as it becomes available, understanding how to be critical in your thought becomes more valuable. Getting to the right answer is really more and more dependent upon the right question, because there's so much data out there now that, the proverbial, if you have an infinite number of monkeys typing for an infinite amount of time, one of them will finally pound out Hamlet. We're there because there's just so much data out there. You can literally prove or substantiate just about anything you want. So you have to be asking the right questions and quietly take the time to think, no, that's lousy logic. That's flawed reasoning. I'm just going to ignore that and move on with your life. Our thesis here is very simple then. And I think you can prove it in your daily lives and verify it. It's this. One, freight managers know more than Wall Street. You see it every day. Two, inflation is dead. And I'm going to pile a ton of data on you to show you why you can ignore all of the fear about inflation. And I'll point out why. There's some Wall Street Journal reporters who I've been interviewed by recently who literally don't understand fifth grade math. We'll talk about that in a minute. Productivity is prosperity, and we're going to see a lot of productivity that's going to give us all prosperity. I'll explain that. The capacity constraint is happening because of the demand drivers, and that's going to make this cycle more prosperous and longer in duration than it would be normally. And it also, the duration is going to be driven by demographics. I'll talk about that. And last but not least, I'm here to predict, and I'll explain why, that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, historians are going to look back and they're going to say, that was the great post-COVID boom. That was the period in time in which more prosperity was created globally than almost any other time, or more than any other time in history. And I'll explain why. It's literally going to change the way already changed the way we live our lives. So bottom line, in the Northern Hemisphere, I know most of us here in America are no longer Some states are a little bit, but most of us are no longer quarantining. But we were going to do this one way or the other for one basic reason. We're in the Northern Hemisphere. Telling us to quarantine in February is a moot point. We're not going outside anyway. But along about May, we decide we're going to go outside. And we've been putting up with this for a year, and we're now all either vaccinated or we just don't care. And I went back and I got to thinking about it one day. I was thinking, I think I knew the Dutch Revolution, the French Revolution, the American Revolution. I literally had to go through a list on Wikipedia of revolutions. I didn't have to go but 50 years to find a half a dozen of them, because what happens is that's when we plan our revolt. We've had enough. We're coming out and we just don't care. Government has not been able to protect us up to this point, or they have not provided what they're supposed to, and we're not putting up with it anymore. So what are we going to do next? This is what we do as human beings. Sometimes predicting the future, it's important to understand math, finance, economics, but other times it's more important to look at other things like freight flows, like sociology, anthropology, history. I will tell you, one of the most successful portfolio managers I know, good friend of mine, his undergraduate degree is in anthropology. Now, he went on and got a graduate degree in MBA, but his undergraduate degree is in anthropology. And he'll tell you that it helps him because he looks at how crowds behave. He looks at how markets behave, because they're a reflection of people behaving in a crowd fashion. And right now, we have come through this. When we come through an abyss, as we did in World War I, as we did in World War II, we survived. And what we decide to do is take on risk. We decide to do things. We get married. We have kids. We build houses. We do things. That is the human reaction to coming through a period like we've come through. And that will be the millennials, Gen Z, Gen X, you name it. This will be their event that will make them do decidedly different things with their lives. And for that matter, the boomers will decide to do different things with their lives because we've survived it. And so what are we going to do? Well, we're going to celebrate life. It's not an accident that the roaring 20s came after World War I. It's not an accident that we had the boom of the 50s and even into the 60s after World War II. We survived, we looked into the abyss, and we overcame. So now let's go do something dramatic with our lives. The demand is coming, and it's coming from every single source. Freight flows gave us that warning, and now they're telling us that it's coming from oil and gas. I'll show you the data: domestic manufacturing, chemical industry, auto, housing, ag, tech, consumer spending, e-commerce, you name it. You cannot look at a place in the economy and not see either expansion or dramatic expansion, or even just beyond they can manage it expansion. It's been a very challenging year, and it's been a very different outcome. Those who accepted technology, put in place larger and larger systems of automation, succeeded. Those who struggle with that are either failed or are going to fail. And there are going to be companies that already have failed, and there's going to be major companies that will fail in the next year. That said, this recovery is going to be faster and more robust and for a longer duration than anyone is expecting. The bond market was worried because the growth rates, we're going to see inflation. We're not, and I'll show you why. You saw the headlines, they're everywhere. Oh, you should be afraid. Oh, you should be afraid. But here's what happens. We live in a dynamic country and a dynamic society. And when these things happen, what we do is we build capacity. We make investments, and we do so extraordinarily well. And there's a guy named Adam Smith almost 300 years ago did a very, very elegant job of explaining that free markets are the most efficient way of allocating resources. And we don't necessarily live in the freest market in the world, but we live in one of the freest ones. And we certainly live in one of the freest ones when it comes to the exchange of capital and ideas. And therefore, that when we unleash those ideas and that capital, we fix these things. We fix them and we are able to build capacity. Think about simple things. Like a year ago, you couldn't find hand sanitizer, and now they give you a gallon of it every time you go to Walgreens or CVS. Gold is falling in value. And if we're getting inflation, that wouldn't be happening. I should also tell you, crypto. Listen carefully. It may take a year, 3 years, 5 years, who knows, maybe longer. But crypto is a fad wrapped around a fraud. That's right, I said it. It's a fad wrapped around a fraud. There's nothing I can accomplish with a cryptocurrency that I can't accomplish with a click of a mouse and move dollars back and forth. Oh, but I can avoid being detected by the government. So I wanted to support something that will help organize crime and the drug trade. I don't think so. Well, but there's a ledger. Well, which is it? Is it anonymous or not? Again and again, every time they make an argument, you'll find that they say that up is down and down is up, depending on what it is you say you're most interested in. And any and every time that you have an investment decision, and the person proposing that investment decision tells you that both opposite polar ends are true, it means you're being defrauded. That's what's happened after the panic. We've got interest rates after peaking out almost 2% on the 10-year Treasury, we're already back to under 1.4, and I would predict that they're going to be back to just over 1 in the months to come. Why? Well, because the central bank, the Federal Reserve in our case, the other central banks, are no longer capable of generating inflation. They're no longer capable of controlling the process. That process is now controlled by other forces, and I'll explain why. So that was the 100-year track record of inflation. This is inflation versus money supply. And if you look, money supply used to be a very effective tool to quickly create and slowly but directly kill inflation. So if they cut money supply, inflation would fall. If they raise money supply, it would go up. Again and again and again, they were pretty much in lockstep. Even during World War II, they were able to have some level of control over it. That continued to be the case. In the post-World War II period, central banks still had some control. It was true for our Federal Reserve and was true for other central banks. But then they began to lose control. Paul Volcker, who was the head of the Federal Reserve under Carter in the beginning of Reagan's administration, was really the last head of the central bank who had any control over it. Because again and again, larger and larger amounts increases and larger decreases in M2 in money supply resulted in no effect into inflation. Greenspan himself talked about this as he was the Federal Reserve Chairman. I can remember a day when the entire bond market would sit on the edge of their seats and wait to see the money supply report, and because they knew the bonds would trade up or down based upon money supply going up or down. And Greenspan made one speech after another, said it doesn't really matter anymore. And one of the reasons he pointed out was that technology provided for ever higher amounts of velocity in money. And velocity in money is the equivalent of money supply, and that is completely outside the control of the central bank, or not completely, but for the most part outside their control. Yet that said, even though velocity of money has continued to get ever faster, it hasn't created inflation. In fact, it's done quite the opposite, because that velocity of money is accompanied with marketplace visibility. You can see pricing. If anyone's charging a little bit more than anyone else, you see it immediately. You find the lower price quickly using today your cell phone, if you use the website. If you look at it right here, you can see this is I multiplied literally the axis by 10 times, and it's still money supply doesn't move it. Again and again, not much of a relationship. So this is that going back to that 100-year series. You used to have a relationship, and now you have these absurd high increases and then plummets in money supply, and it doesn't really move the inflation number. So why is everybody all flummoxed about this little spike up? Well, it's a simple thing. And that, at first glance, you go, whoa, maybe I should be worried. The answer is you should not. Two basic reasons. One is what we really are concerned about is whether or not our income grows at a rate as fast or faster than inflation. As my hero Friedman said, inflation is taxation without legislation, and that is indeed true. But when what's happened over the last 20 years happens, i.e., our income grows at a rate roughly twice that of inflation, then we're getting richer, not poorer. And that's true. I'm sorry, AOC, even the poorest of us are getting richer. If you look at them on a similar scale, you can see how it just dramatically, our incomes have just dramatically gone up. Now, we did spike down for a couple of months because we all went home. Okay, fine. And again, this is a nominal number. And it's important to understand the nominal number versus the percentage numbers, because what's going on with the Fed and their shift has nothing to do with inflation. It has everything to do with them being smart enough to understand the difference between nominal numbers and percentage numbers. If I look at the same data and I zoom in, I see the exact same results, and I see the exact same disparity. Now, that said, there was a drop off right here in the nominal inflation, the CPI. There was a big drop off in our income. Now, it's simple math. Now we lay them on top of each other on a percentage basis. The percentage year over year change in our income, and you hear everybody saying, "Oh, well, it spiked up a little bit in inflation," but you don't hear anybody saying about how much our incomes have gone up, because that would be a ridiculous thing to say. So, I love Mark Twain. He's one of my heroes. Man who does not read has no advantage over those who cannot read. So, when everyone was all concerned about the CPI release in April, I do anyway, but I made the effort to really read it closely. And a couple of things jumped out at me. First of all, their data is flawed. As many people, Alan Blinder wrote a great article. I encourage you to look it up in the Wall Street Journal. It's on their website about how flawed the data is right now. As he pointed out, how do you seasonally adjust for a socially distanced Christmas? It's tough. But when you look at their release, they say themselves that they've suspended many of their data collection processes, that many of their resources are unavailable, and they've had to impute. Basically, if you read this through, they're basically saying, we don't think our data is really that reliable. Don't pay that much attention to it. And if you look a little closer, then you realize we're changing the way we're buying cars. Cars are lasting longer. They're built better, and they last much longer. I remember growing up, my dad got nervous about cars, or at least nervous about my mother driving a car that as it approached 100,000 miles. And many of us think nothing about letting 100, 200,000 miles pass on a car. They're just better made. That said, the price of used cars was a third of the increase in inflation. I do not believe used cars are going to drive global inflation that we should all go to the poorhouse over. One. And two, it's partially driven because, of course, new cars are hard to find right now. So if you look at the actual numbers, you see two big factors. One, the price of the used cars. The other one, of course, is fuel. Last year ago was stupid cheap because none of us were buying gasoline. And so now on a year-over-year basis, it looks really high. Well, that's a silly thing to worry about. May comes along, same thing. They warn us, this data isn't that good. Then you look at it and they say, oh, yeah. And although the Wall Street Journal reporters don't know how to do math, and I'll explain that in a minute, again, a third of it came from used cars. And then another third from fuel. Again, in June, same thing. Don't believe our data. It's not worth anything. And by the way, a third of it came from used cars. And then, of course, fuel. This is not going to ignite global inflation. This is passing. And I'm sorry, Larry Summers, you need to find, grab a headline by spewing fear, but you're wrong. So we look in, we get a little closer. It's this simple. It's the math that we should all learn in the 5th grade. If 100 is reduced to 50, it's a 50% reduction, right? Right. If that, for that 50 to go back to 100, it must be 100% increase. Everyone follows me? I hope so. Therefore, when you have a decline of 0.7% in April of last year, how big does the increase need to be in April of this year in order for it to be back to even? Well, it's got to be roughly double. It needed to be more like 1.5% in order to get back to even. And yet, when you annualize the 0.8, you come up with these incredible 4 or 5% numbers that everybody gets all flummoxed about when they're just not doing 5th grade math. And they again did so in May and again in June. That's the problem. If you look at the nominal number, you realize that it's just a bunch of hooey. But again, Twain, it's easier to fool people it's easier to fool people than it is to convince them they've been fooled. Now, why is all this happening? I think there's a very simple explanation. It's complex, but it's elegant. Gordon Moore, one of the founders of Intel, came out and basically said the power of the processor is going to double every 2 years or less. And the cost is going to get cut in half. And we can all see how that would be deflationary for the processor. The processor you bought 5 years ago is passe compared to the one you can get today. The one you can get today is far more powerful and less expensive, right? Okay, great. But it's also very highly deflationary for software as well. Why? Because if you're not, as a software company, a software engineer, constantly writing thousands of incremental lines of code, making your software much more complex, much more capable of doing much more and taking advantage of this ever increasing processing power, then pretty quickly your software is passe. It doesn't matter. It doesn't work anymore. And so what happens is it's not only very powerful and deflationary for hardware, it's very powerfully deflationary for software. But that's just the beginning. It's also highly deflationary for broad parts of the economy, segment after segment. Every single sector of business to consumer in our country has been disintermediated by technology. Insurance, banking, all these things I've listed out here. You don't need middlemen anymore. You don't need their inventory, you don't need their overhead, and you don't need their costs. And as a result, the cost of things has not gone up, it's gone down. Labor. I've said this for years in presentations, and never before has it been more true, proven true, than it was over this last year and a half. You can really, literally work from anywhere. Productivity continues to increase faster than demand for labor. And that is rough for the transition at times. I get that, but that is where we're going. And you can constantly monitor what people are doing and not doing. Agriculture. Growing up, Cape Girardeau, Missouri, my dad's idea of being an engineer on the farm, he'd send me one direction and my brother another direction, and he'd go the opposite directions. And we go pick out some soil samples, and we come back to the barn, and the average of those would be what the entire field got fertilized. Not today. Today we do satellite scans of the field, and a little bit more nitrogen, a little bit more, but phosphorus goes here, there, potassium. It's incredible what we're able to accomplish with agriculture, and I'll show you a lot more data on that in a minute. Manufacturing. We are going to bring back manufacturing to the U.S., but we're not going to necessarily bring back manufacturing jobs, and I'll talk about why. And last but not least, fracking. Fracking is an American technology. We figured it out. No one else knows how to do it. We are the global leaders in the design of hardware and software. We don't necessarily make hardware and software, all of it here. We do make a lot of it here, but we design it. We think it up. And fracking is another one of those technologies. The ability to go down 10,000 feet and straight down and then go horizontal and take what was locked away source rock and turn it into a big sponge that we can suck um, billions of gallons of barrels of oil and more natural gas than we know what to do with out of previously a part of the earth we couldn't get to, is something we figured out how to do, and no one else knows how to do it. If you look at all of the items out there, televisions, toys, all these things have gone down, not up. The only things that really have gone up are things that are government subsidized. If the federal and state government are subsidizing it, then you might be able to chance to have some pricing power. Otherwise, it's going to go down in value. One of those exceptions is earnings. We're getting paid more because you can do more. With the technology we have, everybody can be reached nonstop. You've got a cell phone, you've got a BlackBerry, whatever it used to be. But that's all good, well and good. But there's an important thing, a difference, because what I've been talking about right for the last 10 minutes is a trend that's been in place for a long time. Why is it paramount to understand what's happening right now? I'll tell you why. Alvin Toffler was a guy. Alvin and his wife Heidi wrote a series of books. He was a futurist back in the 70s. His most well-known book was a book called Future Shock. And in Future Shock, he theorized there are 3 stages to technology. The first one is you can do it. You can do it in a lab. Watson, come here, the first phone call. The second one is you can do it in mass. You can do it so that everyone can afford it, everyone can have access to it. And the third one is that you actually adopt it. You actually make it part of your everyday life. And they went on to theorize that each level 1 moment would lead to more and more level 1 moments, and that each conversion of level 1 moments to level 2 moments would lead to them happening faster and faster, that those would feed on each other. They were literally a logarithmic curve, or a parabolic curve, I should say. But the third, the willingness to adopt it, to accept it into our lives, there was a limit to what we could psychologically, sociologically take, that we would get stressed by. And you see it, and how the older you are, the longer you'll take to upgrade your phone, things like that. But what's happened is this event, this quarantine, has forced massive amounts of not only introduction of a technology, but adoption of technology. 80, 90-year-old people know how to get on a Zoom call. That being said, because that third level has been so dramatically accelerated, and because the vast preponderance of solutions to COVID have been technology-based or technology-oriented, we know technology produces productivity. That's a fact. And productivity is prosperity. So as we've had a society that was, whether it was forced to or just willing to, it benefited us, and because it helped us get through this, but it's going to benefit us even more. And not only is it going to benefit us even more in the productivity it produces and the improvement in the quality of our lives, but because it allows us even more visibility into marketplaces and makes things more efficient. It doesn't matter how much monetary and fiscal stimulus has been thrown into the economy. We will meter it out, and we'll meter it out quickly without inflation. Interest rates are going to remain low, and there will be even more investment in technology and infrastructure. Now, Greenspan, probably one of the smartest, if not the smartest, other than Alexander Hamilton, head of the Federal Reserve out there. And this is how much of a nerd I am. I was watching a C-SPAN broadcast a few years back, and he had been invited to speak at the Reagan Library, and he was asked to give a speech on what was the most significant thing that Reagan did for the economy. What was the biggest thing that Reagan changed in the American economy? And he stood up and he said, I know you're all expecting me to talk about the Laffer curve, about how lowering marginal tax rates may produce less revenue in the next period, but that in the subsequent periods, it actually produces more revenue. And indeed, it's true. And supply side economics works. And Reagan and Thatcher proved it. However, that's not the most significant thing he did. The most significant thing he did, in my opinion, he said, was he fired the air traffic controllers. Why is that important? It's important because not only were they government workers, but they were unionized government workers. And if you can fire unionized government workers, you can fire anybody. It put the rest of us on notice that you must be constantly training and retraining and improving your skills. Otherwise, your number may be up. The net result, our reaction as Americans has been that in the years since, we have consistently proven that we are the most flexible, the most willing to retrain, and the fastest at retraining ourselves of any workforce in the world. And that gives us a significant advantage over the rest of the countries globally. Now, this is important, and it's important for all of us. I also know it's a challenge. It's a challenge because I don't care what business you're in. The biggest challenge you have is finding people. And you need to find people to grow, and you need to find people to prosper. And along the way, you need to find people who are like you, that will protect you and protect your culture and believe in the same things you believe. That's tough. It's especially tough if you have the wrong expectations. This is my son, John. I love him to death because he's my son. I love him to death also because he's as batshit crazy as I am. This was us 2 years ago. We were in Utah visiting my dad, who's retired out there. And we were told that it was the longest day of the year, June 21st, and that the conditions up on Snowbird were not ideal, but they were adequate, that you could ski. And so John and I looked at each other and he said, well, if we can ski in the longest day of the year, in the middle of the summer, in the Northern Hemisphere, we should do so. And he said to me, and Dad, not only should we do so, but we should do so in shorts. And so we did. John was a very dominant wrestler in high school and went on to be a dominant wrestler in college. That would be my son. Seconds after he defeated the number 3 ranked kid in his weight class in the nation. Unfortunately, he suffered a very serious a series of and surgeries of shoulder injury. But he pivoted. He built a following on Instagram. He literally gets paid. He's an influencer with 100,000 followers. And he went on to become known by everyone in the wrestling community. This is Ben Askren, an MMA fighter. That's John being his corner for a fight in Singapore. He's built it and pivoted. And if he came to me and he said to me, this is what I want to do, Dad, I just said, John, I don't know. I think that'd be, you'll have a hard time making a living doing that. He's going to be a video guy. He's going to start a video production company. But you know what? He did. And not only did he, but he's become incredibly prosperous. This is video he shot, and he's been everywhere. He's been to every world tournament. He's been to Kazakhstan. He's been to Singapore. He gets paid royalty checks by Nike, by ESPN, he's on contract with the Olympic team, with West Point. He has a real business. I did his taxes. I would have never believed that a business that he has, he's 25 and believe me, he's prospering, would have even existed. I didn't know this, the business he has did not exist. But it did, but it's been created. And here's the funny part. Not only is this a business that didn't exist 10 years ago, being an influencer, populating everyone's social media, having a video production company, but his biggest complaint is he can't find enough people. He's hiring people. He's trying to get people. He can't get anybody that looks like him. And here's what I realized. If you are like I am, past your 50th birthday, and you look around and you're trying to find yourself, you're not going to find yourself, because 50-year-old me doesn't exist in a 20-year-old body. You have to go look. If you own a business, you run a business, you have to go look for what you look like when you were 20, 30, not what you look like when you're 50, 60. Because here's what happens. I've made thousands, tens of thousands of mistakes over the last several decades, and that's what helped me get where I am. And the people I'm trying to hire aren't there yet. I need to hire me what I looked like 30 years ago. And that's what I challenge you all to do as you meet the challenge of finding people to grow your businesses and find those people that can help you do that, that help you protect your culture. Now, onshoring, it's going to accelerate. And it's going to accelerate. It was already actually starting to happen. Sorry, uh, Mr. Trump. It's not happening because of tariffs. If you think about it, we literally couldn't have made the supply chain longer. When we were kids, if you started to dig a hole too deep, someone would say, "What are you going to do? Dig all your way to China?" Because it literally is on the other side of the planet. It couldn't be longer. But what happens is this: we made the argument we're going to move the manufacturing to Mexico because the labor was cheaper. No, we're going to move it to China because it's even cheaper. No, we're going to move it to Vietnam because it's even cheaper. But here's the epiphany. 25 years ago, I toured a Caterpillar heavy duty engine plant. Caterpillar doesn't even make heavy duty engines anymore. And it was wall to wall people, person after person after person on the manufacturing floor, smoking cigarettes, talking about they can't believe the Eagles dropped the ball on the 3rd-yard line. And what time is beer 30? As they reach over and tweak a nut and tighten a bolt. And then recently, I was at a PACCAR engine plant in Mississippi. There's nobody on the floor, not a single person. There's one person over here way over on the one side, and another person way over on the other side, looking at some computer screens, monitoring computers machines making machines. There is no labor. If there is no labor, then it doesn't matter whether the labor is cheaper in Mexico than it is here, or cheaper in China than it is in Mexico, or cheaper in Vietnam than it is in China. And the other things are going to change that are misconceived. Here's the math. We think our trade deficit with China is far larger than it actually is. China puts $11 into an iPhone. They don't make a single damn piece of it. They assemble it and put packaging. All the rest of the parts and pieces, they come from Taiwan, Singapore, here, Japan, France, Germany, you name it, Korea. They come from somewhere else. None of the parts and pieces are actually made in China. They assemble it and then they ship it to us. Now, that said, all those little parts and pieces are about $400. Yet it's charged to our trade deficit at the wholesale price that it comes in. That doesn't make any sense to me. Apple, just being one proxy, it's an American company. The reason people like the phone is because of American ingenuity and what we designed. And it's the money made on that phone is most of it accrues to its American shareholders and American employees. Maybe we should charge our trade deficit the value of the $11, or maybe our trade deficit with Korea and Japan should be a little higher because they've put in the phone, or they put in the camera, or the memory unit, or one of the chips. But it shouldn't be the wholesale value of the phone. That's ludicrous. Yet that's what we do. And you say, well, is that really that big a deal? Well, in 2019, 17% of our trade deficit with China was smartphones, Samsung and Apple phones. Yeah, it's a big deal. And we're just miscalculating it. And that's a flaw. That said, supply chains are going to go shorter anyway. And as they become shorter, it's going to explode ton miles. And here's why. We're not only going to make them shorter because the labor cost is going down, because the service requirements, we want things immediately. But here's the thing. If you make it here, you get more ton miles. And here's why. The simple example I always use is a car. If I make a car here, I'm moving metallurgical coal and iron ore from the mine to the steel plant, steel from the steel plant to the parts plant, parts from the parts plant to the assembly plant, and then finally from the assembly plant to the dealership. If I import the car, I just move it from the port to the dealership. I only get one freight move. If I make it here, I get multiple freight moves. And God forbid I export the car, because then I get all those freight moves and then I export it. And if we can make things without any labor costs, we're going to be an exporter. Here's the other thing that's happening. And I challenge you to look at everything that flows through your business. The higher the value, the lower the density the good is. The more you're concerned about service, the more you're willing to pay for expedited service. And that is what is growing the fastest in our economy. One. Two, the distribution center of Amazon looks dramatically different than the distribution center of Walmart. I remember the first time I went to a Walmart DC back in the early 90s, and I was just amazed at how good they were at logistics. But their DCs are matched numbers of inbound and outbound doors. There's 50, 60 inbound doors. Freight comes in homogeneous. I would used to ship them a full truckload of Dr. Pepper, cases of Dr. Pepper soft drink, and then they would put one pallet of at a time of that into the different outbound. The trailers going out are not homogeneous; they're mixed for what each store needs. But that's not what happens in an Amazon fulfillment center or e-commerce fulfillment center. You have 10 times as many outbound doors because you're bringing it in, maybe still homogeneously, but then you're wrapping it in bubble wrap and you're putting it in a box way too big for it. And not 90%, not 98%, 100% of the trailers that leave an e-commerce fulfillment center are cubing out before they're weighing out. So I understand that it's short length of haul, but it explodes, can literally 5, 8-fold the number of trailers in that less than 50, 60-mile length of haul because all those trailers are cubing out. I would also point out that we've made a prediction and written reports. We were predicting that volumes of e-commerce in 2026 will be 3 times what they were in 2019. That segment is already exploding. It's only going to do so more. And yet, despite that, the post office, as we now know it, will not exist, at least not in its present form, or not at all in the next 2 to 4 years. And if somebody wants to challenge me, I'm happy to talk about that in Q&A. So why are freight rates so strong? Where's all this demand coming from? Well, you're seeing it in some of the industries I already talked about, but it's just multiple ones. Not only is it they're strong, but we'll get through this. I will tell everyone this. Wedging a ship in the Suez Canal is just a minor moment because what we have now, despite all the headlines, is we have a very sophisticated workforce. We have very intelligent professionals. It's a real profession. When I first got in it in the mid 80s, it really wasn't a profession. The first traffic manager I worked for, as his boss once said to me, Stu's the traffic manager because he showed up as a forklift driver here 30 years ago, and he showed up more often and more sober than any of his counterparts. So we made him the traffic manager, and that was actually true and it was okay because in a regulated environment, the price is the price. But as he told me one day, but in a deregged environment, I need nerds with computer skills and accounting skills. So get back to your cube and do your job. That said, that's the world we live in. And the sophistication of the people that work in distribution management is far above anything it's ever been. 1, and 2, the technology they have, the tools they have is far above anything they've ever had. I used to dream about knowing where my inventory was. Now you not only know where your inventory is, you know where your suppliers' inventories are, you know where your customers' inventories are. And so away you go. Whatever supply chain problems we're having will get solved, and they'll get solved rather quickly. That said, fracking, an American technology. There is a God, and she has a very sophisticated sense of humor. At the very bottom of the financial markets in February of 2009, what they had been trying to do for quite some time, they figured out. And when they figured it out, to get this, it was an event. And since that event, they have gone ever more and more and more and more oil and natural gas out of our fracked well. Doesn't matter how many rigs, they get more and more productivity. So not only can they get oil and natural gas from a source that they couldn't get it from before, but they get it more and more productive, and still no one else has figured it out. And this is important. And let me tell you why. Because around the world, this is my buddy, God rest his soul, Boone Pickens. And Boone says to me, look, you can't tell me that the source rock on New Mexico any different than the source rock on the United States. But if you look, it looks like a teenager's face pockmarked from all those fracking going on in Texas. But the reason it's not in Mexico and the reason it's not anywhere else is because the US is the only country where you have what's called freehold status. If you own the acre of land, you actually own the acre all the way down to the center of the earth, unless you've sold off mineral rights. In every other country in the world, the government either owns or has some rights to it. Only in the US is that true. That said, the largest deposits of natural gas shale are actually under China, where natural gas, I would point out, is 24 per 1,000 cubic feet versus 3 here. Here's what's going to happen. We're either going to do it for them, we're going to license it to them, or they're going to steal it from us. But the rest of the world is going to figure out how we do what we do. Already our productivity has put a limit on the price of oil, and is going to do so for natural gas in the foreseeable future. How productive are we at this? Well, let me tell you how productive we are. We're so productive that if I start back in 2009, when we figured this out, we were dependent upon Russia. We were dependent upon Saudi Arabia. And steadily, but ever so steadily, we grew our production and regrew our production and we grew our production until we got to a point where today, I want to fast forward this far, we are the largest producer of oil. Oh, come on, get this. Help me. Technology is giving me fits today. I'm advocating it. We're the largest producer of oil in the world, and we're larger than Saudi Arabia, basically by a factor of a Kuwait, a country we went to war for their oil years, not that many years ago. We are the dominant supplier of oil. We are not dependent upon oil or natural gas from anywhere else, and we are not only oil independent, but this technology has made us an exporter of oil, natural gas, plastics, all the different resins that we can generate, and put us back in the driver's seat in the chemical industry, and a number of other energies yet to come. So here's what's coming. Here's how good we are. We're so good that we have to flare it off. It literally, in many parts of the country, is the natural gas is not worth what it costs to put a pipe. So when you drill for oil, you get natural gas whether you want it or not. And so they flare it off. How much do they flare off? Well, that's a good question. Here's a map. Hold on, go back. Previous. This is a Google at night map of the world. You can see all the cities, see the lights. You can see the areas, the oceans, and the vast Sahara Desert. No, there's nothing there, right? Okay. Zoom in on the U.S. This is Chicago, my hometown, St. Louis, Dallas, L.A., New York. What's this up here? There's a bunch of prairie dogs with their lighters in North Dakota because there's nothing out there. That's just the flaring. That's how efficient this process is. And that's how much we're flaring. That won't last forever. And that's how damn good we are at it. That said, when the price goes up, this is the way economies work. Adam Smith is right. When the price goes up, we're going to drill, baby, drill. Because why? Because we can. We can make money at it. And so we're going to see a re-expansion. There's a real R squared. There's a real correlation between the price of WTI and oil rigs. And so what are we going to do? We're going to see the number of oil rigs go up. And we're going to see the number of that activity go up dramatically, which will be driven by price. People are talking about oil demand picks it pick up. Well, yeah, they're right. It is. And we're like every cyclical market out there where the price has gone up. So we're going to build enough capacity to kill our own pricing power. That said, we're going to double in the next year the number of oil rigs. And that count will be 2.5 times in the next 18 months. That is a ton of activity for trucks, flatbed in particular, moving steel, but it's also competition for labor. And so it has that wonderful, wonderful dynamic in which it produces demand, which is economically prosperous, but it also keeps the truckers from overcapacitizing and killing their own pricing power because it's stealing their drivers. Again and again, you see that through multiple parts of the economy. This is rail overall. I like looking at rail volumes that don't include coal, because coal volumes are going down because natural gas is basically free. It doesn't include ag, and that has a lot to do with weather. It has a lot to do with the value of the dollar. And it doesn't. So if you just set those aside and you don't look at petroleum because that's a different factor. But just the base of what's happening in industrial America, you're seeing broad strength. And again, zooming in on the same data, again, broad strength. we had a collapse, but we're coming back, and we're coming back with a vengeance. Look at chemicals. Chemicals are at all new highs, and we are, and that drives a strong ISM number. Every trucker I respect has told me that their best short-term predictor of what the demand's going to be is the ISM number. If the ISM number is strong, for the next month or so, loads will be good. If it starts to get weak, they start to get worried about their book, about the phone ringing, and as well they should, because here's the way it works. Chemical carloads will tell you what the ISM number is going to be, and the reason they do so is because it's almost impossible to make or assemble much thing of any mass without consuming some form of chemical. So when I see chemical volumes surging up as strongly as they are right now, I know that the entire U.S. manufacturing industrial economy is surging as well. And the ISM number reflects that. Metal carloads, heavy industry. We're at highest order numbers in 9 years. What's going to happen? Well, people are saying, oh, we don't really make steel here anymore. Steel plants are idle. Well, guess what? We're Americans. We have capital. We have technology, and we're going to spend it. And I understand some of these plants will never come out of mothball, but some of them will. And we'll build new plants, and those new plants will be more efficient than any steel plant ever built before. And as a result, we'll take over a dominant space in this industry. Already we've seen iron ore prices boom, and iron is a low value, high density good. It costs a lot to ship it. So there's an advantage if you can make it really cheaply and you have the ore here. We can really make a nice financial return. Cars. The funny part about this is cars are in short supply, not because we're a shortage of steel, because we're in a shortage of chips, of the technology we put into it. But that said, it's not as dire as we've been led to believe. Let me show you why. We're not anywhere near where we need to be. And if you look at the numbers and you say, well, gee, there was the actual nominal numbers again. And I look at 2020, you see we didn't make any. And then I see 2021, we made a lot. I averaged that number, right, to your average. So that's what we've made over the last 2 years. Make sense? Okay. And then I look at what we made in 2019. We're still not back to those levels. So because of that, despite the fact that we've seen a surge, since we're still not back to where we were 3 years ago, that's why we have a shortage of cars. We'll remedy that. We'll remedy that in the next 6 months. But that explains why, despite making all the cars we are, people are having to turn to used cars. And if you're going to buy a new car and you can't find a new car, so you turn to a used car, you don't buy a hoopty, you don't buy a jalopy, you buy a relatively new used car. And if the data on that is being collected by a government agency that admits they don't have the same data collection and place that they normally do, guess what? That number is going to be higher than it ought to be. So these numbers, high sales, and that are going to continue to be because we need to buy some cars. We haven't bought any. And the numbers of shipping tell us that you expect plenty of cars to be shipped and plenty of cars to be sold in the coming weeks. GM, you got to get the chips. Construction materials. We build houses out of wood in the United States. And if you want to know how many houses we're going to build, all you got to do is look at the lumber shipped. And sure enough, we're at record high levels, or higher levels than we've been since 2006. Now, there's a direct correlation. I can show you the correlations, the R squared. But the bottom line is the millennials are moving. They're moving out of the basement. And there's a lot of people who said that would never happen, and they were just wrong. And here's why. The millennials waited longer to get married than I did. But I waited longer to get married than my parents did. And my parents waited longer to get married than my grandparents did. Why? Because the higher your rates of education and the longer your life expectancy is, the later you wait to get married in general. There are exceptions, of course. But that said, there's nothing that drives consumer spending as strongly as getting a missus and buying a house. As a bachelor, I can live on a mattress in a corner of a room and I'm just fine. I might spend a little bit more money on my car, a little bit more money on my big screen TV, but I don't need dust ruffles. I don't know how comfortable my life is going to become until I get a missus. But once I do, I'm at Home Depot every weekend, fixing something, cleaning up the house. The Home Depot and Lowe's folks will tell you that more than 60% of their sales are from people who were within a year of trading the house. They're fixing up the house to sell it or making the house they bought their home. That said, auto sales are also directly related. When you move into a new house, the chance of one or both spouses trading their car within that first year doubles. So that said, as the millennials and then the Gen Zs and the Gen Xers go and buy their first house and make it into a home, they got to buy things. They got to buy couches. Many of us that are at my stage of life remembers those days when it was tough to afford everything because there were so many things you needed to buy, to acquire, to outfit your home, and they're in that process. And bless them. There's a fact: 72.6 million millennials. And there's 71.4 baby boomers. There's more millennials than boomers. So as those millennials go out and establish households, guess what? They're going to more than buy all the houses that are being left by boomers who are passing away or boomers who are downsizing, moving into less or moving to the beach, whatever. And that trend will last for quite some time.
Donald?
Yes.
Unfortunately, we're just about out of time.
I'll be done in 5 minutes.
Perfect. Okay.
We're the most efficient in making just about every agricultural product out there: soybeans, rice, maize, yield, cereals, potatoes, tomatoes, lettuce, you name it. We are the kings. And here's the one example. That's what we're doing with the productivity per the amount of bushels per acre. So not only on multiple things, but also so everything from ag to manufacturing, you name it, we're efficient. Globally, we saw big dramatic declines in Europe, but we're seeing big improvements there. But we're seeing a differentiation. Countries that adopted technology, massive amounts of technology, Germany, as an example, are seeing a really robust recovery. Others that did not, the Mediterranean countries in Europe, they never went really from being mom and pop shops to being big box. So going from big box to e-commerce is a little tough. And therefore, you're seeing big disparities. Norway, Finland, Denmark, Ireland, Netherlands, low deaths, low, and then others, Italy, Belgium. They're seeing high deaths. They're seeing high contagion rates. So, and that's just a reflection of how much technology did you as a society accept. And you're seeing record highs in some and not so in others. Asia Pacific is set all new highs. And that tells you not only that those economies are all coming back, and that's where it all started, but it also tells you that we're going to see ever more semiconductors. And that is great for our economy because we're the world leaders in hardware and software. And it's a strong driver. Purchasing managers. The reason you're the head purchasing manager of big screen TVs at Best Buy is because you've been over the years better at figuring out how many flat screen TVs we're going to get sold. Every single person is in a purchasing management position is in that because over the years they've been better at figuring out what the tickle me Elmo doll was than others were. That said, in any given month, any given year, individually they might make mistakes, but collectively they will tell you what sales are going to be. And so I look at the inbound container activity for multiple ports, the Long Beach, LA being the biggest, and we're going to build more container ships. So capacity will be there, even though it's tight right now. And that said, we produce what's called the retail sales risk indicator. We look at the amount of container flow and we look at the spot dry van market. and we gauge that relative to what retail sales have been. And when we see way more dry van spot volume and way more container activity than sales, this goes up. That means that the risk of retail sales being better than expected has gone higher, and this means that retail sales are going to disappoint. And we publish this once a month. If you're interested, I can tell you about how to subscribe to the report. But it's simple. It uses freight flow and it predicts what retail sales are going to be. And it's saying right now, it's screaming right now that retail sales are going to be very strong for the foreseeable, at least for the next several months. Dry van trucking capacity is tighter than it's been other than during the ELDs, and the pricing reflects it. Reefer, tighter than it's been except during the ELD adoption, and pricing reflects it. Flatbed, same. Tighter than it's been except during it's off a little bit recently because of seasonality. Everybody took 4th of July week off, but pricing is there. Okay, so quickly, going to be a bigger part of our economy, technology. EU is going to struggle to remain united, because I think the UK may be only the first, at least. There's just such a divergence in the performance of the economies between the Mediterranean countries and the northern parts of Europe. I don't know how they hold together. Dollar's going to remain strong because we are going to grow harder and faster than any economy in the world, except maybe China. And we're going to create more prosperity. And so our dollar is going to remain strong, and opportunity is going to be here. And inflation is going to be benign because we have more visibility into the quality of products, discovery of what we want, and at the best price. We're going to see the adoption of autonomous vehicles. We're going to see supply chains get shorter distance, and that explodes, not diminishes, volumes. E-tailing, last fulfillment is going to triple in size. I already said it. And the density of the freight is the destiny. The higher the value, the lower the density, the higher the growth rate. That's what I know. That's our outlook. And I'm open for questions. What do you have?
You know what? Unfortunately, we're out of time, but we really appreciate you being here and everyone that was listening in. It looks like people can reach out to your email if they have any questions, and we thank you. Yep. Thank you so much for all this great information.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, guys.